I recently took a deep dive into an internet rabbit hole of weird, setting out to find the strangest possible podcast I could, and after laughing, cringing, and being creeped the hell out, I may have succeeded. Before getting into it, I want to address something. People keep asking me, what's with the face blur? Why is your face pixelated? Why do you look like you're on an episode of Cops? I mean, the truth of it is a little embarrassing, but I got a zit the size of Tijuana. Just right. So I've looked through dozens of podcasts over the last few weeks, and I've compiled a list of some of the weirdest podcasts I could possibly find. Most of these aren't in any particular order, although I did try and save the best for last as far as the crazy scale goes. So enjoy. Star Wars Minute's a good jumping off point, I think, because it's a really weird concept. It's one of the few on the list where the title is sort of self-explanatory, although this isn't a 1-minute podcast about Star Wars, it's a podcast about 1 minute of Star Wars. So Star Wars Minute is a podcast where two friends watch the Star Wars franchise 1 minute at a time. Each episode is just 1 minute of the film. So, for example, the very first episode, which came out in 2013, is the 20th Century Fox logo, the title, and the first few lines of the opening, space crawl. Now in 2021, they've just finished The Last Jedi at episode 152, and the last 7 episodes are just the credits, right? So, I mean, these episodes are 20 to 30 minutes long, so that's literally 3 hours of these guys they're just talking about the credits of The Last Jedi, which pretty crazy. The worst idea of all time is sort of in the same vein as far as making a sort of bizarre mission statement and then following through with it. Basically, they set out to review Grown Ups 2 every week for a year. So yeah, you can see why it's called the worst idea of all time. The thing is, they actually did it. And it's pretty entertaining watching them just slowly losing it as they watch it over and over again. I think they had a second season where they do the same thing, but instead of grown-ups, they watch the Sex and the City movie. And I'm not sure what they're doing now, but even though it's called the worst idea of all time, it's actually a pretty good concept. This one isn't really that weird other than who actually made the podcast, which is General Mills, a cereal company. I just thought it was worth mentioning because it just goes to show that everyone really does have a podcast these days. It's just kind of hard to wrap my head around why they thought they needed a podcast and how they could possibly have steady content on it. It's actually a really weird rabbit hole to go down. The whole thing's just kind of bizarre. So if you want to know more about that, Eric West Has a Mic did a great deep dive video on it. I'd suggest you just go watch his video because he really gets into the details of the General Mills podcast. I'll leave a link in the description for that video if you want to go watch it. So far, the podcasts I've mentioned aren't really that weird once you actually get into them. It's more like high concept, like the concept is bizarre, but listening to the podcast, it's not that weird. It's just people talking or whatever. We're going to get weird now. Everything is Alive is a podcast where a man interviews inanimate objects, like literally an episode of him interviewing a lamp, just for an example. So it sounds weird, and it is weird, and it's hard to explain what you're listening to, but it's actually pretty entertaining because it's played just completely straight, and it's surprisingly it works well. I think the writing's actually pretty clever, and it's just surprising how fast you forget about the fact that you're listening to a guy talk to a Coke can. You just get into the interview. It's a pretty well-known pod as far as absurdist humor, and it's won like a bunch of podcast awards and stuff, but I had to mention it just because it's such an odd concept. The Beef and Dairy Network. This one, it's another absurdist comedy podcast, and this one's it's weird. It's essentially a podcast for people who are really interested in the beef and dairy industry, and every episode is just interviews with people in different areas of the field, or people who are related to beef and dairy for some reason. For instance, I listened to an episode where they talked about a new dating app that's sort of like Tinder, except exclusively for people in the beef industry. The app's called Beef Encounters, and one of the guests is a woman who's a modern day milkmaid, talking about how hard it is to meet someone. And it's all played so straight and so real that if this just came on the radio, it would probably take you a while before you realize what was actually going on. They've done a lot of episodes, which it's just surprising that you can make this many episodes all based on this one kind of joke, which is just doing a podcast based on beef and dairy. But they've actually done a pretty good job. Like, it made me laugh a couple times. So I guess go check out the Beef and Dairy Network. Good Morning from Hell is a podcast where a man named Chris is sent to hell, and his punishment is to host a podcast with Satan's brother Clayton as they interview dead celebrities. There's episodes like Sex Advice from Cupid, Interview with Harrison Ford, and Talking to the First Man to Milk a Cow. So, yeah. Intergalactic Candy Quest is probably the most random podcast on this list, and what I mean by that is that there's really no theme to it. It's this comedian who I honestly can't tell if he's like playing a character or if this is just his stream of consciousness. Like, I don't know if this is just his outlet or what, but basically he makes up these really weird stories. He'll have guests on, like, so this is one of those ones that's hard to explain, but like the first episode says featuring Rebecca Black, right? And then it just him with a voice changer as Rebecca Black interviewing himself. It's hard to explain. Like, it's so chaotic. It's so weird, but I do have to say it's kind of entertaining. Like, if you are just looking for something off the wall, bizarre, then I think check it out. Cause I really don't know if there's anything like this podcast in the podcasting world. So, I mean, give it a listen if you're into that. Things are going to get a lot weirder past this point. These last few podcasts sent me down just rabbit holes. So while doing the research for this, I was trying to find suggestions for what people thought were some of the weirdest podcasts. And one that kept getting thrown out is called The Story Must Be Told. So the first place I searched was YouTube, and I found what appeared to be The Story Must Be Told's YouTube channel. And I couldn't really find any episodes, but I did just find like a bunch of random looking videos, like weird thumbnails, weird titles. So I just clicked on one, and this is what I saw. I'll be honest, I was watching this late at night in a dark room, and I got a little spooked. So after shitting my pants watching this video, I did find the actual podcast, and it's weird, it's creepy, so every episode starts with what sounds like a congregation of a cult like meeting up, and they just start reading passages from made up scripture.
The story must be told. In the name of the hog, the dog, the slugger, and the greasy tugger.
And some of these readings are actually pretty funny. And then it just transitions into like a storytelling podcast. It's really just random stories. And they're played serious, but they're usually funny. Even though the concept in general is just so bizarre. The thing is, I listened to a couple, I kind of skimmed through a couple of these episodes. I watched a couple of videos on the YouTube. I still don't think I know exactly what this church is even actually about. Like, I know it's a fake church, but I don't even know what the fake congregation of this church even practices. So while I was trying to figure out what this podcast is even really about, I found their website, and they have this sort of introductory video on the main page.
Welcome. I'm Pastor Andrew. Thanks for tuning in. Your curiosity brought you here, because the story's already been written for you. I know that there are a lot of preconceived notions about our story, but I'll tell you, unless you've heard it from us, it is way off base.
And honestly, it didn't answer any of my questions. Instead, it just has you meet some of the members of the church, and it's really weird. Like, it's edited to feel like you're watching an old VHS tape. It's almost creepy, except that there's just some laugh out loud, like absurd and dark humor moments. Like watch this.
One day I was walking the beat and I heard a voice say, "Hey, stick 'em up." Instinctually, I drew my service revolver and fired in the direction of the voice. When the dust settled, it turned out that I had shot an 8-year-old boy. After I was removed from the force, I walked around Southern California for a while until I found the church.
I mean, another thing I noticed is that they'll have guest preachers on to tell the stories, and I noticed Joe Pera was on an episode, which, if you know who Joe Pera is, it was just hilarious to see him showing up on an episode randomly. Like, the amount of time put into this podcast, I actually think it's really cool, and I recommend checking out the YouTube channel and at least one episode just for the novelty, because it really is worth a watch, just the effort they've put into it. Pounded in the butt by my own podcast. Boy. So, I really don't even know where to start with this one. It took me a while to like fully understand what this podcast was about. Like, I like to understand exactly what it was. So let's just dive into it. So to know this podcast, Pounded in the Butt by My Own Podcast, you have to know Chuck Tingle. So Chuck Tingle is a gay erotic fiction author who started posting ebooks on Amazon back in around 2015. His stories mainly take the form of monster erotica featuring romantic and sexual encounters with dinosaurs, imaginary creatures, anthropomorphized inanimate objects, and even abstract concepts. And just so you can get into the mind of Chuck Tingle here, here's a few titles of short stories from his ebook, 7 Stories to Tingle Your Butt, Volume 1. Bigfoot Pirates Haunt My Balls. Vampire Night Bus Pounds My Butt. Angry man pounded by the fear of his latent gayness over a dinosaur transitioning into a unicorn. My ass is haunted by the gay unicorn colonel. And my personal favorite, the state of California stalks my gay butthole. This is volume 1 of 3, I think. Just so you know. So here's where the podcast comes in. Pounded in the Butt by My Own Podcast is a podcast where comedians read his erotic novels in front of a live audience. So the first episode they read Pounded in the Butt by My Own Butt, which is where the podcast gets its title. It's the only episode I've actually listened to, and it is hilarious up to a point. Like, the main character makes a clone of his butt and then falls in love with it, and then, well, you know the title. So I did listen to most of it, but it is erotic. Like, it's absurd and funny, but at a certain point, you're just listening to gay porn. So if you're into that, or you just want to chuckle, the names alone are pretty funny. Like, it's worth just going on Amazon and reading the names of the books. There's a lot to get into here about Chuck Tingle and his novels. Like, there's actually a lot of interesting details and things I was finding out about who Chuck Tingle is. And it's such a crazy rabbit hole. I might even just do a separate video going into all the details. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's is an entire podcast dedicated to finding out why McDonald's stopped serving pizza. It's hosted by Brian Thompson, a self-proclaimed investigative journalist. It may seem like this concept would get old really quick, but it ends up surprisingly engaging. The first few episodes are literally just Brian calling McDonald's and asking why they stopped serving pizza.
You don't remember McDonald's ever having pizza?
No, I don't.
Can I speak to a manager, please?
I am a manager.
You don't know whatever happened to the pizza at McDonald's?
No.
Okay. Have a nice night.
Alright, sorry about that. Have a good night.
The combination of Brian's monotone voice and the fact that he just insists that there's some bigger conspiracy going on. I ended up listening to the first handful of episodes before I knew it, just because they're only a couple of minutes long. So there's something so engaging about his journey to really uncover the truth. The way he goes about it, like, he really acts like there's some deeper thing going on. And a lot of times the people are like, we don't serve pizza. I don't know what you're talking about. And he'll insist that, like, some higher up McDonald's people told their employees not to say anything to him, like, not to give him any information. Like, I actually think he thinks that McDonald's, like, knows about him and is on the defensive. It seems like a one-time joke that should get old fast, but for some reason the longevity of the podcast and the seriousness in which Brian takes the subject just make it more funny as it goes on. It's really the commitment to the bit that makes this podcast the gem. The YouTube channel is worth checking out as well, just for some of the weird videos. Like, there's this really strange music video where Brian sings about wanting to be hired as a journalist, and the imagery in the video has nothing to do with the lyrics.
Give me a job. Give me a job. Give me a reporting job.
There's several music videos like this that exclusively revolve around the topic of McDonald's pizza. My favorite's a video called Bad Riddance, which is, of course, a parody of the Green Day song. And it's something, like, you just have to watch it. There's also this Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's board game unboxing video. It's just hilariously bland. Like, it's so boring that it's funny, because it's Brian and his monotone voice slowly unboxing and describing the pieces to the Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's board game. And it's just funny.
Hello and welcome to the official unboxing video for Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's, the board game. The first bag inside the box includes the cards for Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's, the board game.
I think it's definitely worth a look. Like, look at his YouTube channel, because there's a lot of videos on there that are hilarious and bizarre. And then you got to listen to the podcast, because it's just, for some reason, it's engaging and it works, and it's hilarious. So shout out to Brian Thompson. for putting together this kind of absurd piece of comedy, because I think it's so weird and it shouldn't work at all, and somehow it does. So that's my list. That's what I got so far. Despite having some truly like bizarre podcasts here, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface here. Like, I just have that feeling that there are some really weird podcasts out there that I just can't find. Part of what makes this search difficult is that most search engines are designed to show you popular results. And since there are literally millions of podcasts, I feel like there are a ton of strange little gems hiding beneath the surface, and I just can't find them. I did find a couple of Reddit comments suggesting podcasts that I couldn't even find. Like, someone mentioned a podcast where a man just interviewed his cat each episode. I also heard about a really old podcast, like 2005 old, where a man would just take a recorder into his bathroom while he took his daily dump and would basically explain what he had eaten the previous day. Supposedly it's called The Daily Download, which, try finding something from 2005 with that generic of a name. So if you guys know where to find that one, or if you have any other weird podcasts to suggest, either in concept or just production, leave your suggestions down in the comments, because I would just love to do a follow-up video to this. Like, I want to get weirder, man. I want to really find out what's going on out there. So thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate the support, the comments, the views, and everything. I hope you like this. If you like this type of video, you want me to do more like this, let me know. I'd really appreciate it. But anyway, I gotta go, ointment up my zit. So